The trees of Rendlesham Forest have stood for centuries, tall, quiet, watching. They've seen storms, wars, aircraft overhead, but nothing could prepare them for what came in December of 1980. It didn't crash. It didn't announce itself. It arrived silently, drifting just above the frozen ground, its lights cutting between the branches like a scalpel through shadow. The men who saw it were not civilians. They were trained U.S. Air Force personnel, stationed on a NATO base, armed, alert, sober. And when they stepped into those woods, they saw something that should not have existed. Some would say it was a craft, others a message. Or maybe a test. One of them touched it, and from that moment on, nothing in Rendlesham would ever be the same. The truth is out there, and it starts here. This is UFO Zone. It started with a flare, or at least that's what the men on patrol thought. Just past the perimeter fence of RAF Woodbridge, a light descended into the forest, slow at first, then gone. These men weren't jumpy. They were American military police, stationed on a British base during the height of the Cold War. They were used to tension, drills, false alarms. But this wasn't a drill. The base sat in the quiet countryside of Suffolk, England, surrounded by dense woodland. RAF Woodbridge and its sister base, RAF Bentwaters, were both used by the U.S. Air Force, and according to decades of unofficial whispers, they were nuclear capable. That meant top security, constant surveillance, and high alert. When the light reappeared, flickering between the trees, the response was immediate. 3 men were dispatched into the forest: Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston, Airman John Burroughs, and Airman Ed Kabansig. Their orders were simple: investigate a possible crash, secure the site, report findings. They expected wreckage. What they got was something else entirely. As they moved deeper into the forest, the light grew brighter, yet more contained. It wasn't fire. It wasn't a reflection. It pulsed, deliberate, patterned, rhythmic. Peniston would later say it was unlike anything he'd ever seen. A glowing mass structured low to the ground, moving between the trees without sound. Burroughs felt disoriented. Kabansig couldn't explain the way the air had changed. Still, they moved closer. Then their radios began to fail. Compasses spun out, and a strange sense of weightlessness settled around them. The deeper they went, the more it felt like stepping out of time. The forest cleared just enough for them to see it. Resting on 3 short legs, half submerged in mist, was a black, metallic craft. Triangular in shape, smooth as glass. Completely silent. It wasn't large, about the size of a small car, but it didn't belong here. Not in this world. Not in this forest. Jim Peniston led the approach, weapon holstered, heart pounding. His training told him to observe, record, report. He stepped up to the object and placed his hand against it. The surface was warm, not hot. There was no engine noise, no seams, no exhaust, only symbols, strange ones, etched into the craft's hull. Peniston described them as not quite hieroglyphics, more like coded glyphs. He sketched them in his notebook immediately, unsure what they meant. He described it later as a download. Not words, not thoughts, but information. Pure data, strings of numbers. At the same time, Burroughs stood frozen. He would later say he felt time stretch. Then, without warning, the craft lifted silently off the ground. It ascended vertically, hovered for a moment, and vanished. The men stumbled back to base in silence. Shaken. Changed. They filed a report. They were debriefed. What they saw that night wasn't logged as a threat. It wasn't entered into any official database. It simply didn't happen. When Sergeant Jim Peniston returned to his quarters, he didn't sleep. He sat down with his notebook, hand trembling, and began writing. Page after page of ones and zeros flowed out of him. Over 16 full pages by the time it stopped. At the time, he didn't know what it was. But something inside him insisted it had to be written. He kept the notebook hidden. Meanwhile, the strange symbols he'd seen on the craft, those etched shapes, stayed burned into his memory. He'd copied them immediately after the encounter. They didn't match any known language or military symbols. No match in NATO databases. No match in alien folklore. Just unique. In 2010, Peniston allowed researchers to examine the binary string. They converted it using SCAA, a standard code used in computers to represent text. The translation revealed a message. It began with a phrase: exploration of humanity, continuous for planetary advance. Then came coordinates. Specific global coordinates, pointing to places steeped in mystery. The Great Pyramid of Giza, the Nazca Lines in Peru, the Temple of Apollo in Greece. Tedesca Lines in Peru, the Temple of Apollo in Greece. To this day, his notebook still exists. The symbols are still visible, and the code remains unaltered. Whatever that craft was, it didn't just appear. 2 nights after the first encounter, the lights returned. This time, the event would draw in someone higher up the chain, someone with authority, rank, and a reputation for discipline. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt was the deputy base commander, a career officer. No nonsense, no interest in science fiction. When the reports came in that lights had been seen again over Rendlesham Forest, he didn't send others. He went himself. He took with him a team of military personnel, Geiger counters, communication gear, and a handheld cassette recorder. His goal was simple: investigate, debunk, and be done with it. What happened instead became the most documented portion of the entire incident. The team moved into the woods just after midnight. Thick fog clung to the trees. The same eerie stillness that had greeted Peniston now surrounded Halt's unit. Then, in the distance, a red light, small at first, hovering above the forest floor. It darted between trees like it was scanning them. Then it changed shape, split, reformed. It wasn't just a light. It had intent. Colonel Halt's voice, captured on tape, remains one of the most chilling pieces of UFO evidence ever recorded. He can be heard saying, "There is no doubt about it. This is weird." And later, "It's coming this way." The object moved silently. It passed through trees, hovered near them, then suddenly shot into the sky. A moment later, blue-white beams of light came down, focused, thin, and directed. One beam struck directly near the weapons storage area. Another came down close to their group. They were being scanned, observed. The Geiger counters picked up elevated radiation levels. The team saw indentations in the soil, like landing gear impressions. But the real impact wouldn't be physical. It would be the reaction back on base and the quiet that followed. Halt filed a report. But what happened next was stranger than silence. It was the beginning of an erasure. After returning to base, Colonel Halt did exactly what protocol demanded. He documented the event. He submitted a written summary to the British Ministry of Defense. The memo was titled Unexplained Lights and dated January 13th. (1981). Nearly 3 weeks after the incident. It described the strange craft, the beams of light, the reactions of his team, and the elevated radiation readings. It was official. It was signed. And yet, no one wanted it. The Ministry of Defense filed it away with no action, no further investigation, no questions. Later, when pressed about the event, they would claim it was of no defense significance. But why would the deputy commander of a nuclear-capable NATO base chase lights through the woods, record audio evidence, submit a report, and be ignored? The memo was quietly declassified in the 1980s. It was short, dry, almost too careful in its wording. But within its lines were clues. 3 nights of activity, multiple witnesses, an incident near sensitive weapons areas. What it didn't say was just as important. It didn't mention Peniston's encounter. It didn't mention the binary code. And it made no reference to a structured craft. But Colonel Halt himself, he didn't stay quiet. Years later, he gave public testimony. He wrote sworn affidavits. And in them, he no longer spoke in careful bureaucratic phrases. He said, without hesitation, "I believe the objects I saw at Rendlesham were extraterrestrial in origin, and that the security services of both the United States and the United Kingdom have attempted, both then and now, to subvert the significance of what occurred at Rendlesham Forest." Why would a man of his rank make such a vague claim? And why did the governments involved treat it like a weather balloon story, without even offering a balloon story, without even offering a balloon? The memo exists. The tapes exist. And Colonel Halt never changed his story. Whatever happened in Rendlesham, it was documented, then buried. Part 6. Decoding the message. For years, the binary code written by Jim Peniston remained untouched, a mystery scribbled across 16 pages of a notebook he kept hidden in a drawer. He never forgot it. He couldn't. Every now and then he would flip through it. The rows of ones and zeros stared back at him like a locked door without a key then. In 2010, something changed. A group of researchers offered to analyze the code using ASE translation, a system computers used to convert binary into text. Peniston agreed. The results were immediate and unsettling. The code translated into a message short, clinical, and strange. Exploration of humanity. Continuous for planetary advance. Statement. Not a greeting. Not a warning. Just purpose. But the message didn't end there. Embedded within the stream were 7 sets of geographical coordinates. Each one pointed to a location of ancient mysterious or sacred significance. The Great Pyramid of Giza, Egypt. The Nazca Lines, Peru. The Temple of Apollo. Greece, Sedona, Arizona. A site known for magnetic anomalies, the Portara, an ancient doorway on the island of Naxos, a location in China's Taishan mountain region. And, most curiously, a submerged landmass west of Ireland, often associated with the mythical island of Hy-Brasil, a place said to appear only once every 7 years in old sailor lore. The message seemed to connect ancient civilizations, unexplained landmarks, and hidden geography, all under the same cryptic directive. But how did Peniston, in 1980, under extreme stress, without computer training or context, manage to transcribe code that decades later would be decodable using modern standards? That's what still puzzles researchers today. Some argue the code was fabricated later, but handwriting analysis, ink dating, and even the original notebook itself suggest authenticity. Others believe the code didn't come from Peniston, but through him. The way he described it, as a download, a burst of thought not his own, echoes countless reports and other contact cases around the world. Not a voice, not a vision, just data. As if the craft wasn't trying to communicate, but to program. It never said where it came from, only what it was doing. Exploration of humanity, continuous for planetary advance. But who or what sent that message. Part 7. The Aftermath and the Silence. After the lights vanished, after the reports were filed, and after the memo was quietly shelved, came the silence. An unnatural silence, the kind that doesn't just settle, it's enforced. Jim Penniston and John Burroughs were never officially told to stay quiet, but they were warned in tone, in looks, in subtle consequences. Medical records vanished. Burroughs later discovered that key portions of his service health files were sealed, not missing, not lost, classified. He would go on to suffer strange symptoms, memory blackouts, unexplained injuries, and eventually a heart condition. Doctors pointed to intense radiation exposure. But from where? It wasn't until years later that he sued the Department of Veterans Affairs. He won the case, one of the only known legal victories linked to a UFO encounter. But the settlement came with vagueness. There was no admission of the source, just a quiet acknowledgement that something had happened. Penniston, meanwhile, continued to have flashes, dreams filled with numbers, repeating patterns, and lights that moved in ways physics couldn't explain. Other personnel who'd been nearby during those nights would later speak of being watched, not by the craft, but by men in suits. Not military, not local police, something else. Witnesses described low-level harassment, subtle, persistent. Phone calls that clicked, visits that ended with silence and threats. And yet, despite all efforts to forget, the incident refused to die. In the years that followed, journalists, documentarians, and researchers descended on Suffolk. Many were turned away by red tape. Others found locals who remembered those strange nights all too clearly. Some had seen the lights, some had felt them. One former base contractor claimed he watched beams of light pierce the hardened bunkers where nuclear weapons may have been stored. But his statement was dismissed, filed away, ignored, just like the memo. The Ministry of Defense eventually declared the case closed. They insisted the sightings posed no threat, that no further investigation was necessary. But in private communications, later declassified, British officials admitted concern, especially over how seriously the Americans had taken it. Behind closed doors, one officer wrote, "If the U.S. considers it significant, perhaps we should reconsider our stance." But they never did. At least, not publicly. Instead, Rendlesham faded into a footnote, a ghost story, a myth told among the trees. But the men who were there, they never forgot, and neither did the forest. Part 8. Theories, PSYOP, Visitor, or Beyond. In the decades since the Rendlesham incident, countless theories have emerged. Some grounded in psychology, others in military secrecy, and still more in the stars. The most common explanation, the official one, is misidentification. Skeptics claim the lights were nothing more than a nearby lighthouse at Orford Ness. That the beam, when filtered through fog and forest, created illusions. That the men overreacted, but Penniston, Burroughs, and Halt had been stationed there for months, some for years. They knew the pattern of that lighthouse. They'd seen it hundreds of times, and what they saw that night was no lighthouse. Another theory suggests the incident was a psychological operation, a test carried out by either the United States or British intelligence to gauge truth. Reactions under stress. This idea isn't without precedent. Both nations had conducted psychological experiments during the Cold War, and RAF Bentwaters, according to some declassified files, had been involved in other covert tests. Could it have been a projection? An artificial holographic event? Advanced tech meant to simulate a UFO encounter? Maybe. But there's a problem. The radiation was real. The landing marks were real, and so was the code, written before aseki translation was common knowledge. Then there's the extraterrestrial theory. A craft, unmanned or otherwise, observed the base, scanned its facilities, and left. Not to attack, but to measure, to collect, to study. The idea of binary communication has long appeared in contact cases. It bypasses language, symbols, even emotion, reducing everything to information, which leaves a final possibility that the craft wasn't from space at all, that it was ultra-terrestrial, not foreign in origin, but in nature. Some believe these beings or phenomena exist alongside us, not above us, operating outside our perception of time, space, and cause. Peniston said the object moved as if time itself bent around it. Burroughs described a light that wasn't light, something that illuminated inside, the mind more than the eyes. If true, Rendlesham wasn't an intrusion. It was a reveal, something showing itself just long enough to be seen. It recorded, questioned, then doubted. Each theory has holes. None explain everything, but all share one truth. Whatever happened in those woods, it wasn't normal, and it wasn't meant to be explained. Part 9. The forest still watches. Rendlesham Forest is still there. Quiet, dense, unassuming. Just a few miles from the Suffolk coast, nestled between old farm roads and forgotten trails. Tourists come now, UFO enthusiasts, skeptics, hikers who've read the stories. There's even a trail marker, a replica of the craft Peniston described, steel, geometric, standing beneath the trees like a monument to something unsolved. But the real monument is invisible. It's in the way electronics still glitch near the old landing site. It's in the whispers of hikers who report strange lights, pulsing silent, drifting low through the woods before disappearing without sound. It's in the dogs that stop walking when they reach a certain point, ears flat, eyes fixed on nothing their owners can see. And it's in the silence. Not natural silence, but something else. The same unnatural quiet that Peniston, Burroughs, and Holt felt back in 1980. The kind that makes your skin tighten. That makes you feel like you're being watched from all angles at once. Some locals say the forest never felt haunted until after the incident. Now, they avoid it after dark. Even those who believe it was just a misunderstanding don't go looking for proof. And those who believe something really did touch down in those woods, they're left with more than just belief. They're left with symbols burned into memory, tapes of real-time panic, and a message that still defies explanation. Rendlesham wasn't a legend passed down through folklore. It wasn't hearsay. It was documented, transcribed, recorded on government letterhead and audio cassette. And whatever it was, it left no physical damage, only questions. The kind that don't fade, the kind that echo. The forest still watches, and maybe it's waiting. There were no explosions, no wreckage to examine, no aliens stepping from a craft, just lights, symbols, silence, and a message carved not into the earth, but into memory. Some say Rendlesham was a misidentification. Others call it the most credible UFO event in modern British history. But when highly trained men witness the impossible, when official memos confirm the strange, and when decades pass with no solid explanation, it becomes more than a story. It becomes a scar in the timeline, a tear in the fabric that separates what we know from what we've been told to believe. Maybe the message was never meant for the world. Maybe it was meant for the few, those who stood in the trees, who saw the code, and who still wake in the night remembering a light with no source. The craft left no engine, no trail, just a direction and a purpose. Exploration of humanity, continuous for planetary advance. If it was a visitor, it didn't stay. If it was a message, we still haven't answered. And if it was a warning, we may have missed it entirely. New episodes are released every Sunday. Until then, keep your eyes on the skies.